All right, in today's episode, we're going to talk about New Jersey crime family, the DeCavalcante family, and their ties to New York, and the Sopranos. We're going to see some parallels with them, with Sirius and Pete.
You hear a lot, obviously, about the Sopranos. I think most people who are into like the mob or like mob content, whatever you want to call it, have seen the Sopranos. Like, I've seen it you know throughout like 3 times. I'm sure you've probably seen it a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Um, and like, admittedly, from like the creator of the Sopranos, that it's loosely based on the DeCavalcante crime family, which is the homegrown New Jersey crime family. Um, Historically, there was originally 2 New Jersey families. I'm talking like, like 20s era stuff. There was one in Newark, and then there was the DeCalvacantes, which was based in Elizabeth. The Newark family went defunct, and then the Elizabeth family became, the de facto family in the region. So, right off the bat, it's, in The Sopranos, they're based out of Newark, so it's kind of like a weird alternate version of that.
Yeah, because in the 20s, it was in Newark. That's where it all started.
Yeah. Nowadays, the Cavalcantes are based in Elizabeth. They're not the only family in Jersey. They're the Jersey family, but you also have Lucchese crews, Genovese crews, and even Philadelphia crime family crews in Jersey. Um, so it's obviously it's not an open territory. Like, they still have like the flag there for the Cavalcantes, but pretty much every family historically had a crew. Even the Bonannos at one point had a Jersey crew. I don't think they have it anymore, as far as I know. But they're all, Jersey is so close to New York. You're gonna have like LCN mafia stuff.
The Gambinos used them a lot too, John Gotti especially.
Yeah. So like in the show, there's the Lupertazis and the DeMeo, Soprano family. You're right. Like, in real life, especially in the 80s, the DeCalvacantes were kind of answering up to the Gambinos. They were their own family, obviously. Like, I'm not saying they were like, they were just like a Gambino crew. Like, they were a family, but they were doing hits for the Gambinos. And even like at one point, John Gotti like was kind of telling them like, you have to make people differently because they weren't doing it properly. So it's kind of a weird like Johnny Sack slash Tony Soprano type situation for those two.
Yeah. And then that's how Phil Leotardo got his quote. The way they make people is all fucked up.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, no, like, so they're an old family. Like that's the one thing the show kind of, I guess, it perpetuates a myth that the DeCalvacantes are like a joke or a pygmy, but you know, like, it's just at the end of the day that they had killers. They were a family that they were powerful. They still are powerful. Like, you don't really they're around. Their current boss is this guy Charles Majuri. You don't really hear about them a lot. They're pretty low key now. So I think almost like, if I was gonna be a mobster, I would almost be the Cavalcantes, just because like it seems to be so like, they don't get the heat, I think, that like the 5 families get.
Yeah, not anymore. In the 90s, there was so many wiretaps on them.
Definitely. That's kind of the era that The Sopranos is kind of like piggybacking off of. Like, John Riggi or Riggy, he was the boss around that point, and he was the boss for a long time. But he was running it from jail essentially. So there's kind of a parallel there with I guess the guy's name is Old Man DeMeo in the Sopranos. They mentioned him a few times. They're like, oh, the old guy's in jail. So that's who it's supposed to be. Um, and Vinny Ocean, Palermo, he was a DeCalvacante member. He was kind of like the acting boss and like a ruling panel. A lot of people say that Tony Soprano was based on him. He had strip clubs. He was kind of a working class type guy. He was pretty close to the Gambinos in New York. So that's kind of like where that comes from.
Yeah. And also, I believe it was the 60s. There was a big wiretap on the guy Sam the Plumber, which Sam DeCavalcante, that's how they got their name, was from Sam the plumber. He had a legitimate plumbing business.
Yeah, he was kind of like he's like the namesake of the family. And he was respected, New York respected him. Um, the family got kind of messy, like I said, in the 90s. Like, Palermo decided to flip, uh, you know. So and there's a wiretap from that era, like the 90s, early 2000s, where these I think it's this guy Tinier Scafini. He's like him and a few other members are on a wiretap saying like, "Oh, is this supposed to be fucking us?" You know, in reference to the Sopranos.
Yeah.
They're kind of like laughing about it. Um, but yeah, and like and just there's so many weird parallels over there. Like there's the whole Bobby looking after Uncle Junior thing. In the 2010s, there was this guy Luigi Oliveri. This is mentioned it's a great book if you want to read more into the Cavalcantes. It's called Giovanni's Ring. It's about an FBI undercover agent, uh, Giovanni Rocco, who is like posing as a mobster in the Jersey family, and he says that like this Luigi Oliveri guy, it's almost like a Bobby type situation where he was looking after John Riggi, the old man who had just gotten out, and Riggy liked him so much that he like made him in a like one on one. He's like, oh yeah, you're inducted, and because of that, some of these other guys, obviously, this isn't true in the show, but in real life, like these other guys were like, what the fuck, like this guy doesn't deserve to be made. He's like a caretaker, and I think you see that a little bit in the show too, where some people kind of like make jokes about Bobby looking after Uncle Junior.
Yeah.
But but yeah, and so yeah, so there's all these like weird situations like that. There's a guy Jake Amari. He was kind of like an acting boss for the Cavalcantes. He died of stomach cancer, and it kind of threw them out of whack. Obviously that's kind of similar to Jackie April.
Yeah, they almost had the same name. One was Giaconino, and then in the show, he was Giacomo.
Yeah. And then, obviously the most famous case is John D'Amato. Um, Again, kind of like an acting boss figure. And there was kind of rumors being spread about him that he was the homosexual. And I think those rumors came from his like girlfriend. I think she was like pissed at him about something, which it's a pretty fucking fucked up thing to, spread, especially if it isn't true. And he ended up getting killed, you know, because of that and some other things, which is kind of like the Vito Spatafor storyline.
Yeah, was it true that he wasn't killed because of that? It was something else.
Yeah, so I think I brought it up in one of the other episodes. Like, it was pretty much used as an excuse to get rid of him for other things. Like, he was getting too close to New York. And if I remember correctly in the show, even like Vito, it's kind of like Vito is super close to Phil Leotardo. You
Yep.
know, so it's kind of maybe that's kind of adjacent there, but that's kind of the thing. Like, they killed him, and they're like, oh, it's because he's gay. But it's possible it was more so just because in real life I'm talking about now that he was just kind of there's a weird power play.
Yeah.
I don't know, like Chase must have known something or like been like relatively well versed in mob history, especially for the Cavalcantes, because I don't know, like these are it's kind of it's not like a one-off thing. Like these keep coming up, these kind of comparisons. So he must have been aware of like stories in the neighborhood or like read books about it.
He lived in Long Island, and there was a lot of people over there
Yeah, I
connected.
think a lot of Lucchese guys are lived there at one point. But no, like I think The Sopranos does a good job of showing like kind of the day to day life of these like kind of greaseball type guys. Um, it's it seems like genuine. It doesn't seem very like Hollywood esque. In a lot of movies, it's like, oh, just constant action. But in The Sopranos and in real life, a lot of the time these guys are just sitting, bullshitting, eating, whatever.
That was the best part. Is all of that. The writing was just amazing.
Yeah, yeah, like it's I do think there were times where it got a little bit goofy, like, what's her name, Lorraine Kuzo. Like, I really don't understand the point of that character. Like, just throwing some random woman debt collector in. Like, I don't know, stuff like that. I'm like, that seems very Hollywood to me, you know. But other than that, like, I think it was mostly on point. And I like the references in the show too. Like, they name drop people. They name drop. I think they name drop Joe Msino at one point. They name drop you know, Joe Colombo, John Gotti, obviously a few times. So it's like, you know, there are, you know, it's adjacent to like the real world.
Yep. Also, back to your Lorraine Kuzo thing. So this is what happened. There was a reporter that was saying the Sopranos, they don't whack a lot of people on the show.
Mhm.
So David Chase saw that and made a character based on that reporter, and then that's why Johnny's like, whack this one, whack that one. Never enough body count for Lorraine. So
Yeah,
he was making fun of the reporter.
that's interesting. Yeah, I think I heard that a long time ago. Yeah, yeah, no, that's yeah. Um, yeah, no, like, but yeah, no, and obviously, like even some of the hits are reminiscent of stuff like what's his name, Doc Santoro. He gets shot outside of a restaurant getting into a car. Like that's very Paul Castellano to me.
Yeah, definitely. And then you had Butchie there, which Sammy the Bull, he kind of reminds me of.
For the DeCavalcante family, like again, like they're still doing stuff. They're not like defunct. Like they're still around. There's again, like there's that big Giovanni Rocco case where you know, he was targeting this guy, Charles Stango, who I guess supposedly he's the underboss of the DeCavalcantes now, but you know, we don't really know that. That's just what some journalists are saying. But that dude was like supposedly plotting to like, you know, he's super violent guy, still plotting to kill people and like, you know, be involved in crime. And the guy was like in his 70s, you know, so that's kind of like a weird Paulie Galtieri type character to me.
Yeah,
Like with Paulie's actor, you've heard it a million times. He supposedly was like a Colombo associate.
yep. He even says it in the show.
Yeah. So yeah, you even have like guys in that life who are involved or were involved in that life, kind of, you know, in the show. Same as I think it's the Barisi brothers, both of them. They were also like involved in some Gambino stuff at one point. The actors.
Yeah, the guy that played Larry Boy, and then Albert. Albert got kicked off the show. The actor,
Yeah.
he had a beef with the guy that played Joey Peeps.
Oh really?
Yeah, they said he is just a hothead, so they had to just get rid of him.
Yeah. Um. There was another guy, Anthony Kappo. He was a DeCavalcante guy. Apparently, he was like a cokehead and stuff, and that's kind of like I think it was Anthony Kappo. It might have been another member. I think that was his name. But he was kind of like a youngish guy, and he was like a drug addict supposedly, and that's kind of like a Christopher Moltisanti type character.
Didn't he? He became a government witness, right?
I don't really know. I haven't heard about that, to be honest with you.
I think him and Anthony Rotundo.
Rotundo, yeah, I've heard him. I don't know about Capo though.
I
You
think,
might be right. I don't want to say like that because like I haven't heard that. You
yeah,
know.
yeah. I heard Anthony Capo cooperated too.
Yeah. Do you think Christopher? I can see Christopher in the show becoming a rat.
Yes,
You know,
definitely.
the drugs obviously that kind of makes you kind of a weak you know, or maybe not weak, but like it makes you like kind of a target, I guess, you know. And I think even Tony or Junior, whoever says that, it's like, oh, what is he willing to do to get like a pound of H or whatever, right?
So I think he wouldn't have ratted until then he got his kid.
Adriana.
After like he had his kid and his wife, then he probably would have ratted.
Well, I think he kind of after Adriana, that's when he kind of went down. You know, I think
Yeah.
that was his one chance to get out, and I think he realized that. And there's the whole hat theory, like in the show, where you know, a lot of the rats wear hats. You know, who's the guy? Who's like the union guy or whatever who's
Oh,
wearing the hat?
Masserone.
Yeah, he's wearing a hat, and they think like, oh, there's a wire in the hat, and Christopher is wearing a hat at the end of the show, and who knows? That's all I'm gonna say. But I can see him. I can even fucking Tony. I can see Raddick. I can see Tony pulling some like Joe Msino type thing because Tony's a shit boss, to be honest with you.
He was like AJ, but a boss.
Yeah, because like obviously Joe Msino in real life wasn't a bad boss, but he did end up ratting. Whereas I can see Tony kind of having that kind of same thing where if someone flips on him, he'll flip on them, and Carlo was flipping, so you know maybe he would have said, you know what? Like maybe that's the thing at the end where he's like kind of staring into the camera. He's like, I know I'm fucked, and maybe he's considering it.
That's a good observation.
Yeah. Either way, he was a bad boss, and like it shows time and time again that he kind of like wants to protect himself. So I can see him because like again, he's kind of this like boomer character who's always like essentially bitching about like, oh, these guys were stand up, no one's stand up anymore. It's like he's not even stand up himself.
I
You know what
know.
I mean? So I can see him kind of doing that and saving himself pretty much.
See, the thing that throws me back and forth is as soon as the show starts, first episode, you already have like four rats at the table.
Yeah, and most of the captains were rats too. Like
I think
again,
every
Larry Boy was. I don't know. I don't know if that's ratting because like he gave false information or whatever, right?
well he ratted. He gave Jackie April. Yeah, the Jackie April. Yeah, but yeah, it's still ratting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And then there's
Ray
obviously
Ray Curto,
Ray Curto, yeah. Um, Jimmy Altieri,
Sal Bompensero,
yeah. Carlo.
Carlo, not Patsy, not Silvio.
That's kind of like a Bonanno parallel there because like when Msino went down, so many guys, Richie Cantarella, etc. Like a lot of his captains were fucking flipping on Msino.
Yeah,
So like that's kind of a same thing here where it's like a lot of guys in leadership positions are like they're just casually flipping.
yeah.
I do know there was a guy, I forget his name. He was a DeCavalcante captain, and he was like based in Manhattan. Because again, the DeCavalcantes had some very small territory in New York at one point. I don't think this is the '90s. This might have been the '80s, '90s, maybe. Um, but there was a sit down, and the Gambinos were pretty much like, you can operate in New York, but you can't make guys in New York into your family.
Yeah. So who do you think Johnny Sack and Carmine was based off of? What family?
Okay, this is good. I was gonna bring this up eventually. So again, like in real life, the DeCavalcantes and the Gambinos were pretty tight. So you could kind of ascertain that like Johnny Sack is like a John Gotti type to Tony Soprano's Vinny Palermo. Um, but I tend to think the Lupertazis are probably more akin to the Lucchese's.
Okay, I was going to say the same thing because they had the long-standing ties with them. They dated back to the 1960s. Plus, Carmine's, I think Johnny Sack said that they had long-standing ties with the Soprano family. So I say the Lucchese's.
Yeah, I mean the reason I say the Lucchese's is you hear like the other families pretty much by name in the show. Like you hear the word John Gotti, you hear the word Gambino, you hear Colombo, you hear Bonanno, you hear Genovese figures. Like I think they mentioned the chin a few times. Um, but I think apart from Henry Hill, they never really bring up the Lucchese's. So if they're bringing up these other four families by name or by figures, you kind of have to ascertain that like the Lupertazis are the Lucchese's because you never really hear about the Lucchese's in reference.
Yeah, the only time I think I heard Lucchese was when Meadow was sitting at the dinner table and she mentioned the five families.
Yeah, because like we know the five families exist in the show just because they mention them and they mention like the figures in them, but they never really mention the Lucchese's. And again, like even like Lupertazi, Lucchese, it sounds kind of similar. And the Lucchese's, maybe not so much the DeCavalcantes, but they have like a lot of Jersey territory. Like they have a Jersey crew. Martin Tassetta at one point, the captain of the Lucchese New Jersey faction. Even now, dude, like recently, there's this indictment, like I think it was a few months ago. Perna's, they're kind of like they're Lucchese members, but like the father and the brothers are members. They were running like a gambling ring in New Jersey. And they got like arrested and indicted.
Yeah, plus the Lucchese's and the Cavalcantes, they mostly collaborated on a lot of union rackets and construction scams.
Yeah. I mean, even Philly, like Philly had, like again, like I mentioned before, like Gambino or Genovese, Lucchese, and Philly, like they all have territory in New Jersey.
Yeah, the Genovese and the Colombos, they had a lot, like a little bit of interest, but not as much as Lucchese's and the Gambinos.
Yeah. That's the other thing. There's a guy Richard Biordo. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Richie the Boot. That's what he was called. He was a Genovese captain based in New Jersey, and he had a crew. And obviously, again, like you hear a lot of like, oh, the Sopranos are based on the DeCavalcantes, but I think Chase and some other people have also said that this Richie the Boot guy, a lot of the stuff is also based on him. Like like the Sopranos have some similarities to the Genovese New Jersey faction.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. He was the guy who had like a bunch of like he had like a McMansion pretty much. And yeah, I don't know. It's definitely more so to Cavalcante, but I have heard his name thrown around for like, oh, who's like Tony Soprano based on. This is in the 60s too, when this guy was active. So
Yeah,
the DeCavalcantes would have been a little more recent for the show.
right.
But yeah, no, for the Lupertazi question, I'm gonna go with Lucchese. I think in real life it's supposed to be Gambino and DeCavalcante, but I think in terms of like the five families, Lupertazi is supposed to be Lucchese.
Yeah, I agree. Lucchese.
I think that's like the one issue I kind of have with the show is like a mob um genre thing is I really wish we saw like, and they wouldn't even have to be named like accurately. They could have had like alternative versions for all five of the families, like
Yeah,
all five of the because like they just kind of say oh New York, and it's just automatically like oh they're referring to Lupertazis. It would have been nice if there was like a like a Gambino type family, Genovese type family with their own name. I think that would have been better for the story than just like vaguely referencing the families.
yeah. Plus, a lot of people are like, you have the five families because Johnny Sack in one episode, he's like, when he wants to whack Carmine, he's like, the four other families will raise a stink. So,
Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely a thing. Like the commission exists in the universe. It's just the names are kind of like a little bit iffy. Is there any actor you wish would have been in The Sopranos who wasn't?
Joe Pesci.
Definitely. I wouldn't mind, maybe not as like a violent guy. I kind of wanted to see him more as like a Russell Buffalino type, in The Irishman. Maybe he could have been like an old time like New York guy or something.
Also, I will say they screwed up Rusty Milio's character. Frankie Valli should have been Nicky Scarfo or something.
Yeah, if they ever make a Philly mob show, well, I guess it's too late now because the guy's in
It's
his 90s. But back then they could have made him Nicky Scarfo.
I'm still mad about that, man.
Yeah, DeCavalcante and DeMeo's. That's kind of like the correlation to like the real world with
Yeah.
all these like different situations and stuff. Like, and even like you see it like a few times. Like another one is like Johnny Sack asks Tony to whack Rusty, and carry out hits on New York or Lupertazi's behalf. And in real life, like Gotti, again, like I've said before, Gotti was doing that. He was asking the DeCavalcantes to like whack like union connected guys, and they were just, kind of doing it.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
again, like I don't want to like feed into this like, oh, they're a pygmy thing. Like they're not. Like that's it's a kind of an insult to the DeCavalcantes, but I can kind of see why like in the media they refer to them like that.
yeah. In the media, they were calling them like the little brother of the.
Yeah, which is weird because again, like they go back like a long time. Like they were around arguably before some of the New York families were. So
Yeah.
um and you'd even have, I guess, some New York members kind of referring to them like that. Like again, that Luigi Oliveri guy from that book, Giovanni's Ring. There's like a part where he meets like some Gambino guys, and the Gambinos are like, "We don't give a fuck if you're made because you're like, you're in Jersey or whatever." Um, so I don't know, like it's definitely blown out of proportion a bit, but I'm sure like from stuff like that, you do kind of see a certain attitude. You see it with Philly too. Like I've there's some mob YouTube guys, who like when they're talking about smaller families, they kind of have this like disrespectful tone a little bit. Like Sammy Gravano kind of was like, "Oh, Los Angeles, that's barely a family." Or like John Panisi, the Lucchese guy on YouTube, he's like, "Oh, Philadelphia was kind of like a joke to us."
I think they're just talking shit.
Yeah, because both these group, well, maybe more so Philly, but like both these groups, like all these groups are families. Like it doesn't matter like how small. Like if you're like a mafia LCN family, like you're afforded some respect, at least by the rules. Again, like obviously you have members who are kind of like gonna look down at other members, but it's still like you know you're like a friend. Like you're in that life. You're part of the organization as a whole.
Yeah, because even back in New York, there was a bunch of Sicilians that came across. They weren't made in LCN, but they were respected by the mob. They didn't.
Yeah, and that's like a gray area. Like some guys who were like already made in Italy came, um, like Cesare Bonventure, the Bonanno Zip. He had to be inducted again into the Bananas when he came, I'm pretty sure. So that's the thing with Zips. It's like and again, same with Furio. Like Furio, like in the show in The Sopranos, he just kind of rocks up and they don't ask any questions. In real life, he'd have to be, even if he was inducted, he'd still have to be inducted again, especially if because they're in Naples in that episode, right? So like that's not even Cosa Nostra, that would be the Camorra. So
Right,
like that's a completely different organization.
exactly.
That's another thing about the show that always kind of like not irked me, but like kind of was like, okay, they're like a La Cosa Nostra family, but they're like, okay, sure, he's related to some guys in Naples. It doesn't matter if you're a Sicilian or not; you can still be a member in America. I mean, but it's a little weird that they just kind of brought Fury over from like another completely different organization, no questions asked.
Yeah, and then you see Johnny Sack like, "Oh, I heard a lot about you." They wouldn't. They wouldn't have did that.
Yeah, he'd have to be inducted again, or not even again, because as far as I know, the Camorra don't even induct people, so he'd have to be like inducted into Cosa Nostra. I think it would be a little bit different if he was like from a Sicilian clan. It would be more so of an easy transfer, but if it's like the Camorra, it's a little bit of a different ball game. That's kind of like a guy in like the Hell's Angels showing up to like a Pagans MC thing and being like, "Oh, I'm in the Pagans now." Like it's a completely different group.
I think that would have only worked if they would did it something about like Capone in Chicago. He would have took them in, but
Well,
mm,
yeah, but Capone was LCN. He was inducted by Masseria.
yeah,
Despite being like from a Camarista affiliated org. Because again, like you don't have to be a Sicilian American to be an LCN. You just have to be Italian American. There's been Calabrians who've been inducted. Guys from Naples, Campania. It doesn't really matter in that regard. But if you're like fresh off the boat you know, and you're already like that, where you're like a camarista and you just come over to New Jersey, no questions asked. Like that's a little bit stupid.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, no, like I don't want to complain too much. I think for the most part, the show is pretty accurate, and like some of the stories they have, you know, again, like there's a lot of comparisons, and I think they did pretty good. Like, you know, it's arguably is like one of the best, like, you know, LCN media.
I agree. One murder that was carried out by the DeCavalcantes on the order of John Gotti was the Fred Weiss murder in
He
1980.
was the yeah, and that was the one Palermo was involved in.
Yep. Yeah. So the power vacuum when Riggy went to prison, is that any parallel to Tony and Junior?
Well, again, because like I think Junior is based on a few different people. Again, like with Junior, I almost think in a weird way, Riggy kind of also rubs off on him because, you know, Riggy was like being looked after by like younger members, and he was like an old guy when he was out. That's kind of like Junior to me. But the power vacuum was more so they just had a lot of ruling panels and, you know, guys who were kind of just like acting bosses, like you know, Amari with the stomach cancer, like you know, he was a Prill or Jackie April type figure essentially. Charles Stango, the guy I was talking about earlier, the guy who was in that you know, the Giovanni's ring operation. Uh Again, supposedly is the underboss now. When that book takes place, it's like the mid 2000s, and again, the book is pretty good. He's kind of like a captain, and there's like a even then there's like a power vacuum. There's like, you know, Charles Majuri is like kind of the acting boss at that point, but he doesn't like Riggy's son, and Stango and him are kind of like plotting to like kill the Luigi Oliveri guy who was inducted by Riggy because he was looking after him, but they're also plotting on killing Riggy's son, because pretty much there's like different people jockeying for power for the DeCavalcantes in the mid 2000s, if I remember correctly from that book. Um, I always kind of saw like the little Carmine and Johnny Sack thing as like a Colombo War esque situation. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like you know, like with Persico and like his you know, like he wanted like his family in power. And then, you know, Vic Arena was like this kind of like young, not younger-ish street guy, and he wanted, you know, people wanted him as boss. So that's kind of like where I see that.
Yeah.
It's a little bit weird. I think Tony has like a meeting with Johnny Sack, and he's like, "Why don't you guys just have like a ruling panel of like captains running the family?" And he's like, you know, some of the other families have that, and it's true. Like, you know, especially in the early 2000s, the Gambinos too. You know, there was a point where like there were different captains, like, you know, Nicky Carrazzo, etc. Kind of like they didn't have an official boss because of all the bullshit was going on, so they just had all these captains kind of mediating things.
I forgot who they gave acting boss to when John went away.
It was Junior was acting boss, Junior Gotti, and then Peter Gotti became acting and then official boss. Peter Gotti, he was the older brother of John. He was made way after like John. He was made when John became boss. He wasn't originally like an LCN guy. I guess he just kind of fell into it, and, you know, Gotti kind of wanted like his blood running things while he was in the can, and, you know, it was Junior briefly, but then they had like kind of this ruling panel thing, and then they just put Peter essentially. Peter was pretty much official boss in title until he died too. But
Yeah.
by that point, this is like, you know, Dom Cephalou and like the Sicilians were running the family by that point anyway. So
Yeah.
same as the Genovese. The Genovese had a ruling panel. Lucchese's had a ruling panel. Pretty much all the five families at different points had ruling panels.
Did the Colombos?
Yeah, I think just before Alley Boy got out, like during the 90s war, there was like a ruling panel of like Persico aligned captains.
Okay.
Like you know, kind of like Anthony Musharuso. who
Oh,
became the acting boss later on. Like he was on the ruling panel.
yeah.
Chicago had something similar too. The Chicago outfit had this weird position called a consiglio, not a consigliere. It was called a consiglio, and it was pretty much a ruling panel of like, where like Accardo and like Ayupa and like these other guys would kind of like switch back and forth briefly running the family. It's kind of a smart plan, in my opinion.
Accardo is one of my favorites. Smartest guy, I think.
Yeah, but like that's what I'm saying. Like I think that's a really good system because then you never really know who's in charge. And yeah, I guess it leads to some issues when people are like, "Oh, who's really running things?" Like captains at each other's throats. But I think if you're in a situation like that where there's kind of like two super powerful guys and both want to be boss, Sacramone and then Lupertazi Jr., I think a ruling panel would have mediated that shit way easier because then you get to save your ego, right? You can't say like, "Oh, I'm above this guy." It's like, okay, we're both like kind of on a board of like directors for the family.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So the DeCavalcantes had that for a little bit, and I think you see that with like when Jimmy Altieri and Barisi and Tony Soprano. And I guess it's Ray Curto. They're kind of saying that, like, oh, why don't we just have a power sharing? And then they kind of throw water on it. They're like, oh, we need to have like a supreme commander. But, I guess that kind of shows that there was briefly a period like that.
Yeah. They called it the Dave Clark Five. Do you think the guy Louis LaRosa was like a Silvio Dante?
Uh, Remind me, who is he?
He was the underboss during Sam's era, 60s.
Oh, said the Cavalcante. Yeah. Yeah, I guess he would be. I think Sylvia was a pretty good pick for Consigliere. He's not super opinionated, and he kind of just, he kind of sticks to the side a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I guess definitely. That's he was a pretty good pick. Like um, in my opinion, the Consigliere usually is supposed to be someone who's kind of like chilled out, and then the underboss is a little bit more of like a forceful personality, and then the boss is kind of supposed to be a mix of both.
This is what I never really understood with The Sopranos. You had Tony was the boss, obviously, but Junior was too. So
Yeah,
then,
Tony is like it's kind of like a Vicamuso and like Matty Madonna, like that in the 2000s Lucchese situation where like Vicamuso is like the official boss, but then you have like a street boss.
yeah.
And
Now,
yes,
who the hell was the underboss?
you never really hear that. Like sometimes they're a little bit weird with the ranks. Like I know they said like, oh, Bobby is like the underboss by the end, and
Yeah,
if we're talking like midway through the show, I always kind of assumed it was like Paulie for some reason, but I don't really. They never really go into that.
because I remember when Furio first came, he said, Tony said to Paulie, he's like, it's me, and then he's like, it's Sil and you together, Sil and Paulie. And then he said, Big Puss goes to you guys. So there's no underboss.
Yeah, it's definitely there's definitely times like that where the show is a little bit like they take liberties with like some of the ranks.
And then,
It could be possible that like the creators of the show didn't really understand the hierarchy, so
yeah, because then, season 5 comes along and Junior's is still like, I'm still the boss of this family. You forget.
yeah, and he is like that's the thing. That's like again, technically Tony is just the street boss or like acting boss. I guess they made it seem like Tony is just the boss, period. But in actual LCN structure, even if you're saying this old guy's the boss, he's still the official boss, you know.
Yeah, because to have a sit down when Ralphie cracked that joke,
Yeah, which
Junior,
by the way, Johnny Sack was in the right.
Yeah, he was.
Historically, if you know if you insult a guy's wife, that's kind of like a big deal.
But you had Karma and the boss, and then of course, Junior's there listening, so Junior's powerful.
Who was supposed to be the consigliere of the Lupertazis at that point? Jimmy
Think
Patrill?
I think Jimmy, yeah.
Okay.
And then I remember in season 5, Johnny Sack was complaining that Phil might want consigliere.
That would be kind of a weird choice. It's not.
Yeah,
Yeah. But to be honest with you, dude, when I'm watching that show 9 times out of 10, I'm on New York side. Like Phil's justified with the Tony Blundetto thing. You know, like Johnny is justified with his wife thing. Like I don't know. Pretty much every time Jersey fucked around, New York was in the right. I found if we're going by like actual like LCN rules.
here's some LCN stuff that would never happen. Like, for example, Tony hitting Mikey Palmise, who's a made guy. He would have been dead that episode.
Dead. Yeah, he worst case scenario, he'd be dead. Worst case scenario, he'd have to have a sit down and he'd get pretty much fucked like with a tax or like even shelved.
Right.
Well, there's a part where Johnny Sack like storms out of a sit down. That's that's pretty bad. Like that's against the rules. Technically, you're supposed to like conduct yourself.
Yep. So here's the thing with the Tony Blundetto situation. He kills Joey Peeps. Joey Peeps wasn't a made guy. He was just a driver.
It doesn't matter though because he's still an associate on record with Johnny Sack's the underboss at that point. So it's like you can't if you're an associate you still technically need to, especially if they're on record, because there's two types of associates. There's associates like, for example, trying to think here, I don't know, like what's his name, Brandon, is that the kid from season
Oh,
1?
Brendan Fallon, yeah.
Brandon Pallone. So like there's guys like that where they're not like official associates, they're kind of more like hangarounds who just do work. um, and then there's guys who are like on record with a member. So Joey Peeps, um, I guess Hesh would probably be on record with Tony. It's like an associate who's like officially with the family, and not like a free agent, and he's like close to a member. So that's like an on the record associate.
Yeah. Now, here's something that a lot of people think was wrong, and I want to hear your opinion. Phil killed Angelo Gareppe, who was a made guy for 30 years. He was supposed to be boss, all this stuff.
Yeah, so that was pretty much like a Civil War type situation where it was Johnny Sack's guys versus Little Carmine's guys. So is it against the rules? Sure, but it's like, if it's like a mob war, like for example, technically the Colombo guys killing each other in the 90s, that's against the rules, but because it's like a war, it's kind of like a different ball game. I was just gonna say, there's also the part where fucking like Christopher is getting beat up in the rehab. That's fucking weird. Like he's made, like why? Like I understand why, but that's another thing. But like, it's weird to me that it's justified for Tony to like hit um Ralph over the stripper. Which by the way is also fucked up. You're not supposed to be doing that. But yeah, and that no issue was caused by like Chris getting beat up by a bunch of other made guys. Like, no one brings that up.
Plus, Benny wasn't even made. Benny was kicking him.
Yeah, if you want to get into that, fucking Artie beating up fucking Benny should have caused some real fucking problems.
He should
I
have
mean,
been
I guess
dead.
it did, I guess, but like,
Yeah, he should have been dead.
yeah. Even fucking Richie April, like, if that guy, that Beansy was associated to him, he, as a made guy, he can go and demand tribute.
That's what I'm saying. Like, everybody says Richie was like the worst character or the second worst.
He's
Richie,
definitely was a scumbag, but like by LCN rules, he was right to
Ri-
like,
Richie was right the whole time.
but if the boss is the boss, Tony told him not to, then he shouldn't. The second time, the first time though, he was before Tony told him to lay off, he was justified.
But here's the thing: as soon as Richie got out, he went to Junior and said, "I'm yours." Junior was the boss. Junior allowed.
That's correct. Again, though, on the street, it's a little bit of like a gray area because,
Yeah,
I think they all knew Junior was kind of like just a figurehead. But yeah, you're right. Junior technically is the boss, quote unquote. So yeah, but yeah, no, like I don't know, man. That's I'm just gonna say he was justified to begin with the first time he did it.
yeah, 100%. Beansy wasn't a civilian. A lot of people kept thinking he was a civilian. He wasn't.
Well, I mean, even if he was a civilian, he could still extort him.
Yeah,
If anything, that would make it easier.
yeah,
The show's pretty accurate with the day-to-day stuff. Some of the storylines are ripped right out of the DeCavalcante family. Um, there's a lot of comparisons, so I think it's pretty accurate for the most part. But there are some like kind of Hollywood-esque, things that it deals with.
All right, so that was about the DeCavalcante family and the Sopranos. Some parallels there and stuff with the other five families. All right, brother.
All right, see you, buddy.